So the PTR test for Season 10 of Diablo 4 is currently ongoing, and one of the biggest pieces for Season 10 is the Infernal Hordes rework called Infernal Hordes Reborn. And this changes a bunch of different things about Infernal Hordes. It adds a ton of new stuff, even adding a new kind of uber boss you can select to go into if you want to. And Infernal Hordes has been my favorite content in Diablo 4 since it was released, and right off the bat I want to say that this overhaul to Infernal Hordes makes pretty much every piece of it better than it was before. It's a lot more fun, it has a lot more variety, it has a lot more potential for greater rewards, especially when you fight the new boss at the end. So it's pretty much an upgrade in every way, but I do also want to say that I don't think they took this overhaul far enough. We're still just in the same room. They still didn't change up the offering system enough to turn it into an actual roguelike system where the rounds just keep getting more difficult and you get to choose between these cool powers, even though they did make the offerings much better. And they didn't increase the amount of waves you can do in a singular run, which is honestly the biggest letdown for me personally. I wanted to be able to do like 20 or more wave runs, but even with those downsides, the system is just much more fun and much more varied. So let's first go over the description we got for Infernal Hordes Reborn from the official post going over the PTR. So they have some few bullet points on what they did to the system. So we've done a significant rework of infernal offerings revealed between each wave. Our goal is to try to make all offerings feel valid as choices for you as you start to stack them to focus on your run. And they have changed almost all of these. A few have pretty much stayed the same, like getting the butcher one where he just spawns in. And actually, even that one did slightly change because it's not a unique anymore, it's a legendary, so it seems to be more common. They did add some other unique ones, but a majority of the offerings have changed, and most of them are better. Like one of the really interesting ways they did this was, say, for the Hellborn spawns, which was usually the best ones you wanted to go for. Now, one of the main Hellborn ones that's not just buffing up, say, how many Hellborns you get, is that now anytime an Ether event spawns, it spawns with some Hellborn. So it's kind of a mixing in that. So it may not just be the best to go for something like Hellborn anymore. You may want to mix in Hellborn with other offerings to get the most out of that run. And they say we're doing this by balancing existing offerings, changing the effects of some offerings, and adjusting base monster populations. And then at the start of the Infernal Hordes, you'll now start with an Infernal offering to immediately stoke the embers and breathe some fire into your run. So instead of going in, you kill that elite in the middle, then a wave spawns. Instead, after you kill the elite in the middle, you get your first selection. So you actually start the run with a selection of an offering instead of doing one wave with no offering, which is kind of really boring and slow. You now get an offering right at the start, and some of these offerings are pretty substantial, so even in that first wave, it could be pretty crazy. And then the Fel Council has had some promotions when fighting them. One of their members will now be the designated council speaker and gain enhanced abilities just to make it more difficult. The Fel Council was actually ended up becoming one of the easier bosses in the game, specifically because it's 3 of them and most builds do have AoE functions in them. So I am glad they're kind of buffing them up a bit more so it's a bit more difficult. Then we have Chaos Monsters. Hell has unearthed a new monster family from deep in its horrid maw. Born of smoke and brimstone, these Chaos Monsters provide a powerful shrine-like buff when killed. Now, I'm not actually sure how this works because especially when we get to the Chaos waves, you'll come across a lot of these Chaos Monsters. I don't know exactly what they are, but some of them when you kill, they just give you this effect where it's kind of some random damaging effect that looks completely crazy that is absurdly strong. It almost feels like you're playing a survivors game like Vampire Survivors or something where you get just random effects proccing everywhere. It starts to feel like that and it actually feels really cool, but I'm not sure exactly which Chaos Monsters give this. But then we have probably the biggest and most fun change to the system, and that's Chaos Waves. Within the Infernal Hordes, you'll occasionally be offered the choice of a Chaos Wave within the Infernal Hordes from your Infernal offerings. And with this, you still get your 3 offerings, but there can be a 4th off to the side that's purple, and that will be the Chaos Wave. You can expect an amount of Chaos Waves offered relative to the Infernal tier each time you enter the Infernal Hordes. And they did also change the Infernal compasses to get in, so there's now a new one that you can only use pre-Torment tiers. It's only 4 waves, and that's that's specifically for leveling up. Then you have magic rarity, which is 6 waves. You have rare rarity, which is 8, and you have legendary rarity, which is 10. I'm assuming they're meaning based upon that rarity. So legendary on average, you'll get 3. You do seem to get these quite a lot, and they seem to be more focused later into the round. I think I've gotten like 5 or 6 of these in one run, so you get a lot of them. Chaos waves completely alter the upcoming wave, imbuing havoc and intense challenge. These waves will have significantly increased difficulty, but reward far more aether should you be able to survive. Chaos waves will have many different combinations to discover and master. Dodge deadly projectiles from chaos rifts, slay a rampaging hellworm, or hunt down erratic aether goblins. Chaos awaits. So essentially, you are choosing for only one wave to be super buffed instead of choosing one of the other offerings that buffs up your entire run. And these waves are ridiculous. One of them is just constant boss spawning with these portals. One of them is just spamming out these hellworms that you kill and they give a bunch of aether. One of them is legitimately just chaos portals and aether goblins constantly spawning everywhere. And what's actually kind of cool with that is a portal will randomly spawn on the ground that all the aether goblins will try to run into. The more that get into it, the more buffed up a massive goblin will be when it spawns. So you basically get this massive goblin that just gives you a ridiculous amount of aether. So there's just dozens and dozens and dozens of aether goblins. If you have a super good build for that wave specifically, you could potentially get like over 1,000 aether in that wave alone. So some of them are absolutely ridiculous. And then we have face Bartuk, the Warlord of Blood. Rather than facing off against a fellow console, you could choose to risk your hard-earned aether and throw it down against the insidious, reborn Bartuk to complete your Infernal Hordes run. So after you're done with your run, you'll get another offering selection, which is essentially, do you want to go and face a fellow console, which is free, or do you want to spend 666 aether to fight Bartuk? Now, I think the reason you fight Bartuk is because he gives a lot more loot, and it seems he has guaranteed chaos armor. If you haven't heard about chaos armor, check out my last video. He seems to drop multiple chaos armor guaranteed, and he drops just a ridiculous amount of loot. It seems he drops a lot of ancestral or greater affix items. He drops a bunch of scrolls of restoration, and I think he drops a bunch of other materials. So he is absolutely juiced in materials, but you could still spend the rest of the aether you get at the normal loot boxes you would normally have. And I think one of the biggest reasons Infernal Hordes just feels better in almost every way is the offering changes. Now, the Chaos Waves are incredible, and I would probably choose them almost every time just because they're so fun, they're so juiced in terms of aether, and they're just a lot more difficult, which is really nice. Even with a kind of like best in slot build, which I can somewhat easily on the PTR with like all the mythics you want and all the legendaries and everything fully leveled up and maxed out. Even with that being the case, and I was using probably the strongest druid build still, these waves were actually noticeably more difficult than other waves, especially getting like the boss waves and stuff like that, and especially against the goblin chaos wave, because there's just so many constantly spawning that you need a really good build to try to defeat them all. So that's really nice, but just getting the offerings outside of that are just much better in my opinion. I think one of the big things they did, which I mentioned with the Hellborn, is they tried to turn a lot of the best offerings you take into something that you're getting with all of the other aether events. So instead of getting like one of the aether shrine spawns where you have to stand in it and kill enemies to complete that aether event, instead of that just being annoying because it has nothing else with it. So if you previously didn't go into that, it felt useless. You just had to do it to get it out of the way. Now, a lot of the things tie into those other aether events spawning. Like with Hellborn, anytime one of those spawns, it also spawns with Hellborn. So it's like mixing them together. There's also a unique power where anytime an aether event spawns, it has a chance to spawn an aether goblin as well. So getting one of those also is buffed up pretty heavily. Then they just changed a lot of the existing powers. Like one of the really good ones for those shrines, now any enemy killed within the circle of the shrine has a chance to just drop an aether, and it has a pretty decent chance, it seems. Another cool one is with the aether masses. There's one of them that basically gives you more and more aether the more powers that tie into the aether masses you get. So you can do a full aether mass run where once you get this one power that keeps scaling it, any other aether mass power you get will also just keep scaling it from that one power. So there's a lot of different combinations you can do, and I think depending on how all of this is specifically balanced, I think that actually using a combination of a bunch of different ones may end up being the best, instead of like previously where you would want to try to get full full Aether Fiends or full Hellborn, and if you didn't get those, that run probably wasn't super good. And I think that's actually one of the best things they're trying to do, is they're trying to make a combination of different ones be the best thing to do. And it also just seems like there's a lot more variation, and the waves do seem a lot more crazy. I know they said they did rebalance the monster populations. It does feel quite a bit more crazy, and it actually feels like the scaling gets pretty ridiculous as you get into later waves. Not necessarily in the difficulty, unless your build isn't super strong, but just in terms of how quickly everything's spawning, all the different things that can spawn. So things can start to get really ridiculous, and I think that's very much what I want with an Infernal Hordes run. I really want to feel like those later waves are just ridiculous, and if my build isn't good enough, it's going to start to get really difficult just because of how crazy it can get. Now, we do know that this is a permanent addition to the game. I just don't know which pieces are going to be permanent, because I don't think we've gotten the information anywhere on if any of this is Season 10 specific. So my hope is that all of this is permanently staying, the Chaos Waves and Bartuk specifically. Even if Chaos Armors aren't staying, Bartuk can still be a really cool addition to it, and I very much hope the Chaos Waves stay, because those are legitimately the funnest part. After you do some of these Chaos Waves, you'll see why they're so fun, because they're just so ridiculous compared to anything else. But overall, I think this overhaul to Infernal Hordes is just an upgrade in basically every way, even though I think they didn't take it far enough. I really wanted to move to different rooms and have much longer runs. Maybe sometime in the future we'll get additional expansions, but I do think Infernal Hordes is just better in every way after this overhaul. But that's all I want to go over, so thanks for watching.